there's contemporary and then there's also historical uses of drumming. I actually have my master's from the University of Washington in ethnomusicology, and my focus was on drum cultures of the Yoruba tribe of the southwest region of Nigeria. In a historical context, and actually contemporary in Nigeria, various regions, areas around West Africa, drums have been used for communication. They've been used also for healing. So whether it's within a religious or secular context. In a religious context, a lot of indigenous religions amongst the Yoruba and amongst various tribes or ethnic groups throughout West Africa utilize drumming and drumming in general for prayer, for spiritual healing, for spiritual enlightenment. We actually see that even done some in contemporary like church settings, and even within African American culture, but actually a lot of different cultures throughout the United States utilize drums, whether it's the drum set, uh, for praise or for prayer. You definitely see a strong emphasis on music within African American culture, of course. In Yoruba culture, actually, there's secular and there's also a religious context for drums. And what I mean by religious, and there's multiple religions, like there's Yoruba Christians, there's Yoruba Muslims, but within an indigenous religious context, Yoruba, there's actually a god that was associated pre-colonially with the drum called Agalu, and Yoruba culture, even the making of another religious drum was extremely important. And so there's that, there's that historical context of it. And then on a contemporary level, there are like, as you make drums, as you develop them or whatnot, there's even, there's it's very, it can be very sacred for a lot of people to come together and to drum this drum and to invite people to come and party and have fun and actually just enjoy the sounds of the music. So depending on what context there is, there's various ways that that people like kind of bring out, or that they actually that they empower the drums and therefore empower their communities. When I spoke about historical context, I spoke about it within the African paradigm, but within the indigenous Native American paradigm also, there's a rich history of drumming, there's a rich history of storytelling, there's a rich history of healing through drums. And as I mentioned, I mentioned Native American from the United States, Africa, but drums can be found throughout the whole entire world. And what you see is in various cultures, they have been utilized historically for gathering, for community building, for community healing, for storytelling, and also as a powerful aid for cultural transmission. I actually, one of our contracts that we've gotten was through DCYFS, Department of Children and Family Services, through the state, and we're right now doing research in the juvenile detention centers, figuring out, just looking at the therapeutic effects of African drum facilitation amongst incarcerated young African American males. So, there's a lot of, on my part, there's research going on with that. We're working with some social workers to kind of collect the data and figure out what effects it has on positive identity formation and on just healing, on just even mental stress and wellness. Interesting enough, it was around 1739 where there was a huge rebellion of enslaved Africans in South Carolina. And they signaled the rebellion through the use of African drumming. So those guys, they went ahead, they fought back. It was called the Stono Rebellion. They fought back. They actually ran away, and they were going for their freedom. And when they were eventually apprehended, the power of drums was, they their European enslavers saw like how powerful the drums were, or the psychological effects that it had on African peoples. So that in 1741, one of the slave codes that they implemented actually banned indigenous African drums in the United States. So, and they didn't really start picking up again until the 50s, where a Nigerian man came over by the name of Babatunde Olatunji and reintroduced African drumming in the African American community, but also the greater U.S. community. And then, and also, I think it was 1959 where his album Drums of Passion came out, which actually, which was the first basically African drum album. So one interesting thing, whenever I say ethnomusicology, people jump and say, "Oh, you mean ethnic music?" and and actually, that's a misconception. Ethno in general refers to our type of research, which is ethnographic research, right? Contemporarily, musicology as a as a traditional field has really focused on has had a strong emphasis or focus on structure of music, like structural analysis of music. Ethnomusicology represents brings in other elements to the musical to the musical analysis, which is also the cultural analysis, and the context, the political aspects of it as well. And so our cousins, we call them, we call our cousin field basically, or sister field, anthropology, right? So they refer to us as musical anthropologists. So we study, we definitely do music, but we also study it within the cultural context of where the music comes from. And we try to take a deeper look into like the culture that we're studying, but also into ourselves and into human nature in general. So it made me curious to say, okay, cool. So if I was to extract certain cultural components of what drumming means, even the therapeutic elements, and as well as the cultural elements, how will this affect a very marginalized, economically and socially oppressed people? And will that also empower them, or will that give empowerment to youth in order to um, creatively engage in their world for better results? Within the school curriculums in the United States, you know, people, scholars or even education activists have talked about it ad nauseum that, we have an ethnocentric education curriculum. A lot of times when I come to schools, and I even talk about African empires, from not from the context of like, okay, colonization, but actually like, hey, this empire actually had this run. This is how long they ran. And like all empires across the world, they fall, they rise, and whatnot. And I give even detailed descriptions of West African and African American history. Students, it doesn't matter what cultural background they come to. They come to me and they say, hey, it's why do I not learn this in class? Why do I not understand history from this perception, like from this framework? African American history, Native American history is American history. That's not debatable. Even so when you look at cultures who have been here for so long, who have helped to build the foundations of America in general, and you introduce their history as something that's just merely added or as an elective versus a full integration of that history within the school curriculum, you're being untruthful. You're being untruthful. You're not teaching history within a full context. You're actually teaching a very when we talk about ethnocentric history, you're omitting history and omitting omitting historical events that actually would change the way that students and our society views certain cultures of people in the United States. Means that to an extent you're not being truthful with your students, and you're not also helping them to grow, to truly grow, like develop critical mindsets or critical minds. Equity and inclusion to me definitely represents integrating, having a full integration, so that students can get a full so they can get a full educational experience, and that their history or their understanding or perception of the world isn't lacking. And it's really important now as we grow into a more global society, but even within the United States paradigm, it's important as we see all the issues that our society's facing, with each other. We don't have, there's an unhealthy perception of like of diversity or even of cultures that have been here that have also helped to build the very foundations of the freedom that many of us value. Three top points that I hope gets taken away from my presentation in March. One of them is definitely resiliency, understanding resiliency through culture. So I'll definitely introduce African drumming. I'll introduce some of the history that I've introduced today about how African drumming was used throughout the diaspora, especially in the United States and throughout the Caribbean, for resilience, to fight back, to encourage people to say, hey, we see injustice, and we're going to actually go against this injustice because it's not okay. You know, Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Dr. Martin Luther King said that. And so understanding how culture can be used as that. Also, I want to take away the fact that culture is healing, and that there's diverse methodologies for healing. So I'm going to be introducing, of course, an African modality for healing, and I just want people to be able to experience that, be able to experience that stress relief, be able to experience happiness through drumming, through culture, and even get a diverse experience within that. The third thing that I'd like to introduce is how fun it is actually to learn about cultures other than your own, or even just like about cultures that have been suppressed in the United States for so long, and be like, hey, actually, this is actually fun. Why is it that I don't learn this? And why is it that my children aren't learning this in the school system? So a lot of my education that I want to, what I'm gonna teach, I hope gets people to think about like even what they're taught within traditional school settings, and builds and continues to just help to build that movement of equity and inclusion. So definitely, at the Hawk Foundation, we do educational seminars. We do drum circles, drum facilitation. We also work with other nonprofits as far as like employee team building, stress relief, and also of course we do therapeutic programs that are accompanied by data collection. So if anybody's if you guys or any other organizations or schools are interested in connecting with us, you can find us at hfeducation.org. Again, hfeducation.org.